and they built a house. It was in the next school district over. Well, actually, they tore down half the old house, and they put up a new house. But the electric wires had not gone through that area yet. So they still had gas lighting. And she had this beautiful chandelier in the dining room. This gas light is white, glorious white light. And I love that big lamp. And then, but later on, they built the house, and it was all wired for electricity. But it was several years before before the line went through.
Okay.
And then when I got married, the line had gone through and Mark's farm property just 2 years before that. That had all been set up for wiring back in the 30s. But then World War II came along, and that took care of all of that, so all that was put off. And then by 46 and 47, they were trying to catch up. So that house on the farm had 2 sets of wiring in it. One set that my father-in-law had put up. He had gone to school in Milwaukee, at Milwaukee School of Engineering, and done a lot of electrical work. And he had worked in some of the big hotels, putting out electricity in, I forget what the 3 big hotels were in Milwaukee. But anyway, he knew how to do that. So they had a little wind thing outside the house. And in the upstairs, in one of the upstairs rooms, there were a couple of great big batteries, and it was hooked up. That little wind charger would charge all the time and keep charging those batteries up. So they had one light bulb in the ceiling of each room, and one switch where you could turn things on in each room that he had wired. And so they were allowed, like, they maybe listen to the news at supper time or something, and they could have lights for a while in the evening. But that little wind charger, it took a lot to get things really charged up. So that the first few years we were married, we were stringing new wires in that house every place because they never had a refrigerator, and my folks got us a refrigerator. That was one of the things. Well, it was right after the war. You put your name in and registered for all appliances and things that you wanted because they were trying to catch up. So my dad knew the wedding was coming up. Furniture was easy enough to get, but appliances like stoves and refrigerators were difficult. So he put his name in, and the first refrigerator that came up, they hauled over and put up at the farm for me. They were, and there's another story that that Mike likes about tractors. Because most of the farmers had, well, they all had horses, and then some had tractors. I can remember the boys in rural school talking, and each one, depending on what kind of tractors their father had, that, of course, whether it was a John Deere or whether it was an Alice Chalmers or whatever, that they'd argue over which tractor was the best, and whatever the kind their daddy had. That was absolutely the best. And all that we had was a little old Fordson that they used sometimes for extra hauling on the farm. But Mark's oldest brother-in-law had talked with his father-in-law, and he said, when the war was over, he said, now I've got my name put in on all the dealers all around, because he said, I want another tractor, but I don't need it right away. But he said, if you want a tractor for those boys, he said, and if you want to keep those boys working, you've got to get them a tractor because they're not going to stay and work with those horses. And, oh, Grandpa, no, well, we've had the horses, you know, we've got all the equipment, we're all set, we get everything done. And so one day Johnny came over and he said, okay, my name came up. I can get a tractor with such and such a dealer. If you want it, he says, I suggest that you either take it or forget, because those boys are going to go. That one wanted to go and work at the farm at Marcus Ann. Anyway, he didn't want to stay and work with the horses. And Grandpa says, okay, get there. So Johnny took Mark's brother along with him, as Mark's brother was gonna drive the tractor back. And the younger kids in the family were all waiting anxiously, and it turned out it was one of these little John Deere, the putt-putts, you know, the two-cylinder. It was a small tractor. Anyway, they could hear that putt-putt coming, and so they were running. And Mark's sister ran out, and, Pa, you gotta come, Florian's coming, the tractor's coming up the driveway. So Grandpa came in the house, and he was in the sun porch looking down the driveway, and he was looking, and oh, he said, I thought it would be a red one. It was a John Deere. But I have a picture at home that I bought at an auction fundraising thing. It's when they're delivering a John Deere tractor. It's the painting, and the tractor came in at sunset, so the sun is setting in the distance, and they're backing the tractor off the truck, and the little boys in the family are running up to see it. And there were only a couple people put a bid in on that picture. Dolores Novak was one of them. That she did, the one that she saw I was bidding on, so she didn't bid anymore, but I got that picture with delivering that John Deere, and it just, it fit in with our family story. And then it got to going to high school, but I was trying to think of some of the other things that I had just.
How big was the family? You had a when you got married and you had a family. How big was your family? You see, 2 of your daughters are here.
Oh, I had 12 children.
12
children that grew up. We lost one little boy. But
wow. And you were on a farm, so they all got to help out?
They all got to help out. They were all workers, and they're still all workers to this day. They're good workers. So I've lost 2 daughters, so I've got 10 that grew up. I have 2 sons that are disabled, and now they're all, my kids are getting old. They're retired.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No, because they can come over and help a lot. But I'll tell you, they've been coming every spring and cleaning up my whole yard. And last spring was a crazy one. It rained every Saturday, so for 4 weeks in a row we were cleaned out. But and this week now, I said, okay, it's time that the grandsons start coming. Otherwise they're fishing and hunting and stuff all the time. I said, because these sons and sons-in-laws should not be doing that heavy lifting anymore. One of them was going to the chiropractor all the time. One of them had surgery on his foot. Tom was in the hospital for a few days. And I said that they shouldn't be doing these So there were 8 grandsons, or grandsons-in-law, that came over, and they worked, and they did a good job.
Marge, how many grandchildren, great-grandchildren?
I have 28 grandchildren, and I have, I don't know, I was counting up the other, it's probably like 34 great-great-grandchildren, and then there's 10 great-greats, or there will be soon 10 great-greats.
Oh, my goodness.
So they added it up one time, and I said, well, there are 76 direct blood relatives, because there's some adoptions in there too. So at that time, there were 76 people that, one way or another, I was directly responsible for. As my brother said when he came over one time, look what you have wrought.
When did you become involved with the Historical Society?
After my husband died. He died in 97, and Gary Wick stood next to me in choir, and Gary was very active in the Historical Society, and he wanted some things. He knew I had a computer. He wanted some things typed up, and so he said, "Well, I type up some labels for the cupboard," and so I did that. And so then I did a couple other things, and then it came up, well, why don't you just join the society? Well, once you join, they find something. First thing a good commander does is put these new people to work right off the bat.
I should have met you about 3 or 4 years before I did, Marge. But
And so that's when I got involved, and I've always been involved in history anyway. I have one of my cousin's children did a lot of research on my grandmother, my mother's mother, who was quite a remarkable woman. She had a great effect on her family. She was married when she was 15. She was left a widow with 7 children 10 years later. Her husband got pneumonia. And so she moved off the farm, moved to a house in town near her parents, and rented the farm out. But she had to go every year over to Wautoma to make her report on at that time, because wives really weren't allowed to own much of anything. So she had to report every penny that she spent for her family, to raise her family. And once a year she'd have to drive over to Wautoma, which was quite a, if you went with horses.
Yeah.
Later on, they did get a car. I know that, and my mother wrote in her diary, when my uncle was old enough to drive a car, then they bought a car. And they used to take a car to high school, which is 2 miles into town, or sometimes they'd take the horses. But if it snowed, and the girls knew how to drive, but primarily, one of my uncles was only 13, and he drove a lot because the boys were the drivers, you know. And she mentioned when they'd have a snowstorm or things that they would take the car to go to school. Otherwise, sometimes they hooked up the sleigh with the horses. And I don't know if those poor horses stood outside at school all day while they were in school or not, but because that was when they were going to high school. Later on in high school, my aunt, my dad's sisters, we've got pictures, this was in 1918, 1919, where they played basketball. The girls played basketball back then. They had the teams, and they just like the guys did. And then all of a sudden it died out. You know, like, oh, girls don't play basketball. The sports are just for the boys, you know. And I think it's wonderful now when the girls can do things too. But the times change, and what people expect and what works out.
do
Otherwise,
you want to open it up to any questions anybody has?
sure, if anybody's got a
Does
question.
anyone have a question for Marge?
Yes.
When did you get your first automatic washing machine?
I think when my 3rd or 4th child was born, my parents got me a washing machine, and then it was real nice when they got a dryer, because in the wintertime when you were doing diapers, and my first 4 children, by the time that my 4th child was born, it was 3 weeks later that my oldest child was 3 years old. So I had a baby, a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 3-year-old. There were a lot of, my kids were trained pretty early. I didn't do diapers any longer than I had to do, but yeah, a washing machine was a really nice. Yeah, my mother-in-law had a washing machine, but it was run with a gas engine. And you had to heat the water on the wood stove and haul it out and put it in the washing machine. And when I was a kid, that was my job every Sunday night. You'd fill the boiler and put it on the stove. We had a boiler on the side of the stove, the wood stove, but that only held that you had water for just washing up and washing dishes. For washing clothes, then you put this big copper boiler on and heated that up. Remember Phil Snap the soap? Well, that was my job, to shave a bar of Felsnap the soap into that wash water, and it would soften up overnight. And then you'd carry it out to the next room to the washing machine. You'd set up you had 2 tubs of rinse water, with cooler water, and the third tub had some bluing in it, so that your white clothes would come out, presumably later. You have to be careful not to get too much bluing in, but then later on, I know when some of the ladies were doing the altar cloths from church, they all had embroidery on, and when you wash them, then the embroidery kind of shrinks together, so you would have to stretch them as you were ironing, and it was a big job, because they were long altar cloths and they hung to the floor on each side, and they had all that trimming on. It was a big job, and they used spray starch on them. It was the best. And you do that little bit and you hold it apart in the iron. But I know that some of the women, and I'm not sure if you can still buy laundry starch or not. I used to have a box of laundry starch and a bottle of bluing, but I haven't used that for years and years, so I don't.
Might be past the expiration date by now.
Well, yeah, it was a big savings when they came out with, and that's another thing, you know, people used to walk everywhere, or they had to take horses everywhere, and the people visited back and forth. If you're where the farms were close together, I think if you got out in the central part of the country, they were further apart, but they'd walk over and they had time to raise their flowers. And now you talk with the women, they've got all these modern conveniences that do things so fast, and we're all so busy all the time. Why are we so busy all the time?
I think Dave's got a question.
Marge, when you
Yes.
got married, did they give you a chivalry?
When you got,
Yes, yes, they gave us a chivalry.
No, I don't even know what that is. Dave's been trying to tell me about it, because I got daughters getting married, but what is a chivalry?
Well, when they get back from the honeymoon,
Okay,
you wait until presumably they've gone to bed some
okay.
evening. And then you all go over and the women have all brought things for lunch, and then the guys brought, and you knock on the door and pound on the door and you wake them up, and the guy, yeah, and you have noisemakers. You have your dishpans and your clamp on them, and your horns that you blow. They blow the car horns. You make a lot of noise and you wake them up. And then you're supposed to wake the poor guy up, and he's supposed to go to town and get a couple cases of beer or a keg of beer. And so then you.
Have you ever been on the other side of a chivalry?
Oh, yes.
Where you're the one banging the pot?
Oh, yes, oh, yes. When I was a girl, our neighbor across the street got married. And actually, then in later years, he was a beautician here in Princeton. He and his wife had 4 boys, but they lived across the road from us, and they got back from their honeymoon, and they were living in a tent by his. So the neighbors all went over and sneaked over very quietly, and then all of a sudden started making all the noise. And
They're already living in a tent. And you make the guy go out and buy more beer?
yeah, well, that's a part of it. I mean, everybody knew, you know, the guy was going to have to furnish the beer. You furnish the rest of the food and the snacks and things like that.
But you usually knew you were gonna get chivalry, so you could have beer on hand.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
So bad.
You could foresee it.
Well, there was one neighbor up the road. My dad had a silo filler, and he filled silo for all the neighbors, and they'd come in contact with him, and as their stuff was ready. And this one neighbor, he never paid for it the year it was done. He'd wait until the day before he wanted to fill the next year. He said, "I know I haven't paid yet for last year. I'll pay you now, but will you come and fill my silo this year?" So my dad, just automatically knew it. Well, the guy was a bachelor, and then when he was older, he did get married. And so the neighbors decided, okay, because he was kind of tight, I believe. Is the expression. And
Sounds like it.
they said, okay, we're gonna get him. So they waited until they figured he was sound asleep. They knew he was back. They'd seen him come back. And so then they drove in and started all their noise and everything. And his mother came to the door. She
His
says,
mother.
what do you want? Well, he says, we're here for chivalry. We would want him to go down and get, oh, no, he isn't here. He isn't here. Okay, we know he's here. We saw him. Oh. You just get him up and you send him downtown to get some beer. But that was, we even gave Linda and Thomas chivalry when they moved to Princeton.
Oh, yeah.
And the bed, they took the mailbox down, they tied it up in the tree somewhere, and,
Jeez,
Yeah.
guys played for keeps back
but,
then.
yeah, so how come the custom died out, I don't know. But otherwise, I mean, you
Oh,
just,
you disturb the neighbors.
Well, they did disturb the neighbors. We rented a house in town when they did that.
yeah. But that was one of the old customs. To do that.
Good question.
Then we also, mentioned my grandmother before that, she'd had a great effect on our family. She was a very, very special lady, raising this family, by herself as a widow. And so my one cousin did a lot of research on when her family came here. And so she's since done a lot of research that's kind of gotten me into it. And the girls have looked up a bunch of stuff. So we're doing a lot of things, but it takes a long time looking all that up, researching
Yeah.
all
It's
that.
fun, time goes by really fast.
But it's interesting, one of my relatives, my grandfather's older sister, when they were getting married, her husband wanted to come to the US. And she was not really, she couldn't read or write, which in Wales was very common. Some of the men were educated, and some of the men couldn't read or write. So we've got her, the wedding certificate signed, and it's Jane Thomas, her mark. And even after she came here, he came over 3 different times with several other fellows from the area to find an area where there would be Welsh people. She said, I don't want to go someplace that it's all German people or Polish people, and I can't talk with them. So they came over, and of course there's a lot of Welsh people living toward Red Granite, toward Burrow, and over Neshcaro at one time. There were a lot of them came. Most of the people that came here were Welsh farmers, but at the same time there were also Welsh miners who did a lot of work with the rocks over, especially at Montello. A lot of the rock was chipped out and sent to Chicago. There's many, many buildings in Chicago that are built with Montello rock. So then I actually, with my aunt, the oldest daughter is 9 years older than the next child in the family, because in between he was traveling, finding a place that she would be willing to move to. But he was in the Civil War, and then in 1890, or the late 80s, they decided to pay a pension to survivors and to soldiers who were. So we've got the papers that she signed, and it was still Jane Thomas, her mark. She still just made the X, and somebody else wrote her mark on there. But she was a very, very determined woman, and she wouldn't give up until she knew that she was going to be able to get along with the neighbors.
Then, did you wanna say anything about that book that you brought before we wrap up?
Oh,
Marge?
a few years back, two of my granddaughters wrote at the same time, at Christmas time, Grandma, can you write the stories? Because our kids like the stories that you tell about when you were growing up. And so I said, okay, I would write, and the one had contacted this company that would print the book up for you, and they gave you, I didn't care particularly for the suggestions as to what you could write a story about, but I could write a story about anything I wanted. I could send in 2 or 3 stories a week if I wanted, but I wasn't feeling good. And I didn't send in very many. I'm 40 or 50, I don't know how many. I actually ended up sending in. And I wrote some for Emily, and Emily eventually had, this company put the book together and published it. And some of the stories were poorly written. Some are pretty interesting. And then, and Tammy had contacted me at the same time. And Emily wanted stories from when I was growing up. And then Tammy suggested, she said, well, then why don't you write some stories about when our parents were growing up, you know, when you were raising children. Not first when you were a child, and then when you were raising children. So I've got, but I don't believe, and I suggested, because I said, I don't feel good enough to write any more stories, take both girls' sets of stories and put them in the one book. But I don't think she used,
I don't know if she used any
No.
Tammy's.
no, I think she just used the one. So I've got a stack at home of some other stories that could be put together. But if you want to look at it and like some of the suggestions were, who was your first boyfriend? Or when did you learn to drive a car? Well, I learned to drive when I was about 4 years old. I learned to steer the truck. Every farmer raised a few acres of peas, and every country road had a few miles down there was a pea viner. So in the fall, when they were ripe, you'd cut the peas, and then you'd have to haul them into the viner, and they'd go through and be shucked. So my dad would have the peas all, you know, rolled up, ready to go, and he showed me how to run his old truck. He set it real slow, and all I could do was just steer the head, and I could also put my foot on the brake when I had to stop. And he'd fork the stuff out as fast as he could. And then we'd get a load, then we could take it to the pea viner, and they'd run it through. And they'd make this huge stack of pea vines, which as they fermented got very fragrant. We were glad we didn't live very close to a pea vine.
They had them all over Green Lake County.
But that was, now of course they're all done, harvested with the huge machinery and the big things. But this was almost every farmer had a few acres of peas, and sometimes then a few acres of corn that would go to or sweet corn that would be.
You ever read sorghum?
Sorghum.
Sorghum.
Oh yes, sorghum. We had, you need good sandy soil for sorghum. Of course, there was a lot of that around Princeton. So we did have the sorghum mill here at one time. But when I was growing up, we had, it was a few miles up the road from us, so we had some property that it had marsh where we pastured our heifers in the summer. We could take them down there, they had water, and he'd take, so they'd have salt and things like that. But the upper part of it was raised the most beautiful watermelons and pumpkins and sorghum. So we'd have sorghum every year. And you raised it, it looks a lot like corn, except that it has a head on it instead of having ears like the corn does. It would have the sorghum seeds were all in the head. So you'd wait until the first frost, and then you'd go and you'd club down all the leaves on the sorghum stalks, and you'd cut them, and you'd take them to the sorghum mill, where they would be piled up, and they'd go through these rollers and get the juice out of them. and you'd have sorghum, which, molasses is good, but molasses has a very strong flavor. Sorghum is much milder. And you can make Johnny cake with sorghum and, oh my goodness, cornbread. And it's just very good. So then, when they did a sorghum mill here in Princeton, then we raised a few acres that one year, and I think we had, if I'm not mistaken, we had 5 milk cans full of sorghum when we got through. And of course, that lasted us quite a few years, but we used to eat a lot of sorghum. Now you have to go to Olson's Mill in order to get sorghum. So the last time I went there, I brought 2 or 3 quarts of it, and so every so often then we'll make Johnny cake and the hot cornbread and spread it with butter and sorghum, and it's just really good.
So Marge, I wanna have some time to enjoy birthday cake with you.
Well, that's
So do you think we should stop your presentation now and then maybe just have more discussion while we're having cake and
sure.
stuff for birthday?
That's a
So
good idea.
how about we join me with thanking Marge for a wonderful talk
Oh,
today.
good.
History of life.
I had hoped to talk more on, and I got carried away with the rural schools, I guess. But on the society and all the things we've done with the society.
Well, we can still talk about that, but we can have some cake while we're doing that. How's that sound?
So, thank you very much
Alright.
for listening to me.
Thank you, Marge.
Yeah.